I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your councillor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Welcome one and all to VLGA Connect and TGU. Yes, we're back after a week off with much to catch up on, and I'm delighted to say Tony Raunic is here to help with the catch-up. G'day, Tony.
G'day, Chris. Hi, viewers. Welcome to November already, hey? We'll be hearing Christmas carols soon.
It's frightening, isn't it? Yes, 3rd of November as we record this. Unfortunately, Julie Reid can't be with us today. She's out and about around the state doing some work with councils, which is great, keeping her gainfully occupied. Tony, I thought I might just quickly whip through some of the things we're going to talk about today. There's been another court ruling on an appeal. This is Lou versus Blaisher. It sort of has gone under the radar a little bit, but we'll lift the veil on that today. We've had a council CEO making a statement about local law activity in relation to posters on the Israeli-Gaza conflict. Monitors for Glenelg Shire, which I'll talk about in a moment. Lots of mayoral election results. We've got a new CEO appointment to talk about, and a very nifty little campaign that's been launched by one inner city council, which we'll tell you more about as well. So quite a bit on, Tony, but I want to start with Glenelg Shire, if we may, where the minister this week, Melissa Horn, has announced that she will be appointing 2 monitors, I think it will be, for a 3-month period at Glenelg. Last time we spoke, we'd had 1 councillor resignation and a CEO resignation. Since that time, we've had another councillor resignation, and the mayor, according to the media statements, has called in some assistance from the government.
Yeah, that's right. Councillor Scott Martin has asked for assistance, saying, we want some intervention. There are some issues with culture. He said there at Glenelg, and of course there has been a series of resignations at Glenelg Shire Council, starting in January, I think, with the resignation of the CEO Greg Burgoyne, but then
long-term CEO too. He had
correct, and then mid-year, I think Councillor Anita Rank, who did cite a change of employment in July when she resigned, but subsequently we've had this month another 2 councillors resign, Jaden Smith and Chrissy Hawker, and of course the CEO Paul Phelan also has resigned this month. So on the back of that, the minister's indicated that 2 monitors will be appointed commencing on the 13th of November for that 3-month period. Chris, I wonder whether it's a bit of a trend to appoint more than 1 monitor now.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
I thought that was interesting too. There's a couple at Greater Geelong, of course, but prior to that, we've had single monitors. So 2 in this case. Whether we read anything into that about the scale of the issue, perhaps.
Or maybe it's just a notion of sharing the load a little more, perhaps. But we'll watch that. But expect an announcement over forthcoming weeks as to who those monitors are and what the terms of reference are as well.
I notice, no, I don't know what the current status of Paul Phelan, the CEO, is. The initial announcement said he would finish in January. He's been in the role, as we said, since the start of the year. But the council has, in its statement about the meeting to elect the mayor and deputy mayor next week, said they've appointed an acting mayor, David Hole, I think it's David Hole, who's a director, so that meeting can go ahead. It's been put back a week, Tony, because of all this turmoil, I guess, that's been happening in that organisation.
Yeah, certainly a lot going on at council, and I think perhaps that short delay might make some sense to let things settle down, and so we can then proceed with the mayoral and deputy mayoral elections.
2 countbacks have been scheduled there, one coming up later this month, one in the first week of December, to fill those 2 vacancies after the resignations of Jaden Smith, who was the deputy mayor, and Chrissy Hawker, who resigned just a couple of weeks ago now. Tony, I hinted also at some resignations, or at least a resignation from another council. Now, I've been away, so I haven't had a chance to do any digging here, so I don't know the inside story, but at Strathbogie on the council's website, there are 2 extraordinary vacancies showing on the councillor page at the moment. There's been a report in the local press that Reg Dickinson has resigned. The other extraordinary vacancy is the position that was filled at Accountback earlier this year. The name of the lady that got appointed to that position is escaping me right now. So again, reading between the lines, no official announcement from the council. We know there's been a monitor report that would be sitting with the minister. So I guess it's a watch this space.
Yeah. Lots again going on in Strathbogie. Was there at Nagambie the other day on the way through. But
did you see the new foreshore path that they've developed around the lake?
I did.
There?
I walked the foreshore park, saw all the play equipment that's on the lake for the children and all that. So yeah, really a great facility there. But as you say, lots going on at Strathbogie, monitors, councillor resignations, etc.
Yeah, so watch this space on that one. You didn't get across to Euroa to look at the magpie statue, did you?
No, I didn't see
I
that.
do want to get there and see. It's had a name very recently, which I'll have to report on the roundup because I don't have that to hand, but just a terrific sculpture statue that I think will be very popular. All right, that's what we have on council vacancies, other than to say Maroondah by-election is set and there's 4 candidates for the position vacated by Marika Graham, 2 men, 2 women from memory. So there'll be more to be said about that as that by-election process runs its course. Tony, I noticed the new CEO of Stonington, Dale Dixon, put out a statement in the last few days responding to media reports and public comment about the removal of posters around the city. The posters were related to, and I haven't seen them, but related to the Israel-Gaza conflict. Dale has made the statement that the local law requires material on public infrastructure to have prior approval, and that those posters have been removed under the local law without regard to what the content of the posters were. But of course, some have suggested that the council's being political in this action.
Yeah, and I understand that suggestion, but clearly it's been disclaimed by the CEO Dale Dixon, and he makes the point that I think sometimes it can appear inconsistent to the public when they notice that some posters on public infrastructure have been allowed to, or appear to have been allowed to stay where they are when others have taken down. And what CEO Dale Dixon has said is that council staff act to remove these things when either they're cited by outdoor staff at council or where there's a community complaint. So conceivably there are circumstances where neither of those things have happened, so the posters have stayed. In this case, there were posters about, I think about hostages, the faces of the hostages who had been taken by Hamas. They've been removed. The CEO makes the point, this is consistent with the local law. You need permission to put up material on public infrastructure. It's has nothing to do with council making holding a political position on that particular conflict. And in fact, I think the council has I think this is one of the councils that took some action to light up the town hall, didn't they?
That's right. Yeah.
In solidarity with Israel. So I think council did the right thing. That one of the issues is when political material gets put on public infrastructure, there can then be a counter reaction where people, deface it or write things on it. And if you remove it, then it's almost like you're reacting to the defacing rather than the original placing the material on there. So I think council are being consistent. I think the CEO is saying, regardless of the message the material was seeking to make, they would remove material unless it had the permission of council to be there.
Yes, and surprise, surprise, as he said, some of those reports were neither complete or necessarily accurate.
Correct.
I can't remember an international event like this having such an impact at a local council level here in Australia, Tony. It's extraordinary what's been happening in Sydney, for example, with councils, and we'll have an example of that to talk about a little bit later. But can you think of an international incident that's had this sort of impact locally before?
It's hard to think of something in my sort of time that has been so impactful, and I think it's there are strongly held views, long held views on either side here, but also there are different communities across Australia that have particularly strong connections to communities in that Israel Gaza area. And I think, we have them in Melbourne. Glenelg in particular is one, Stonington as well. And then we have them in, as you've indicated, in places like Sydney, Waverley Council being an example.
Yes, we'll talk about the Waverley example in just a little bit. Another one that happened while we were on our break last week of interest, certainly from a legal standpoint, the city of Boroondara has voted to remove the council prayer. Now, we've talked about this issue before, and the philosophical discussion, I guess, that councillors sometimes have about whether a prayer that connotes one particular faith is against the principles of diversity and inclusion, etc. In this case, I did listen to the debate. Most of the councillors seemed reluctant to dump the prayer, but felt they had no choice, and we can only assume that's because they'd received some in confidence legal advice about the Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities. That was my read of it.
Yeah, I certainly think I can confirm that they did receive some legal advice. I saw some reports of that. I haven't seen the advice, but yes, and a vote was 9-1, so a fairly strong vote in a particular way. And as you say, if it is, the advice appears to be based on this UN convention in relation to human rights. Right. I'd be really interested to read that advice, because I wonder how it would explain the various Australian parliaments that still open their sittings with, a parliamentary prayer, often followed by, the Lord's Prayer. So the Senate, the House of Representatives in the Commonwealth, I think in Victoria, both the Legislative Assembly and the Legislative Council follow that process with a prayer. So I would imagine those parliaments are still subject to those UN conventions. So I'm not sure how this advice explains that. Either they're saying those parliaments are in breach as well, or they're saying there's some exemption in relation to them. So I'd be cautious if I was in another council to simply follow this step on the basis of assuming that legal advice is, definitive as to the position.
I saw a comment, I think, from the lawyers. It was Maurice Blackburn, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Basically saying that they, I think, anticipated or I don't want to put words in their mouth, hoped or encouraged other councils to look at this and to potentially follow suit. You're saying that might not necessarily happen as a matter of course.
Well, I think some councils will look to the parliaments for an example and see what attitude they take, because presumably they're subject to the same laws.
All right, so that's Boroondara. Now, the case of Lou versus Blaisher. This is the former councillor at Stonington. Is it Stonington?
Correct, Stonington.
Yes. Against Yehudi Blaisher, the arbiter who made a ruling that Mr. Lou has challenged or sought judicial review of. This has been rejected by the court. Tell us a bit more about this, Tony, because this one's
this has gone under the radar. So it's gone to the Supreme Court. So it's an appeal by former councillor Lou to the Supreme Court of Victoria from this arbiter decision of Mr. Blaisher. And so the arbiter hearing, the original arbiter hearing was about remarks councillor Lou made on social media, disparaging a particular private individual, a Mr. Core, and those comments were made in connection with a forthcoming council decision on a proposed multi-purpose stadium, sometimes described as a netball stadium, and the arbiter found former councillor Lou's comments amounted to misconduct, and the case really concerned whether the social media comments were made by Councillor Lou in the course of performing his councillor functions, his councillor duties, his councillor role. And this is because, Chris, misconduct is defined in the regulations as being behaviour in the course of one's performance of their councillor role, as distinct from, say, gross misconduct, which can only be found by VCAT, which is just, any behaviour that demonstrates that a person's not of good character, not a proper person to hold the office of councillor. So VCAT might find that something a councillor did completely outside their role of councillor in their private life, for example, amounted to such gross misconduct that they weren't a fit and proper person to be a councillor. But when we're talking about these arbiter decisions, misconduct, we're looking for behaviour carried out by a councillor in their role as a councillor. And we might just put up something visual here, which is an extract from Section 28 of the Local Government Act. And Section 28 is the part of the Act that sets out the role of a councillor and says, it's threefold. Section 28(1) up there says, participating in decision-makings of council, representing the interests of the community in those decision-making, and also contributing to the strategic direction of council through the development and review of key strategic documents. And what the Supreme Court found was that Section 28(1) definition that we saw on the screen there is not exhaustive of the role of councillor.
Yeah.
So it's not. It doesn't absolutely cover everything that a councillor might do in their role. They found that because of the use of that word every, so it says at the start of the section, it says the role of every councillor is, and they said, well, that was, that part of the section is defining what every councillor's role is, and there might be, at some councils, some councillors might have roles a bit beyond that, because there might be at a certain council certain policies that say that those councillors at that council do other things. There might be a certain authority for a particular councillor at a council.
So, Tony, is in effect, does that mean they're saying that you could read that sentence as the role of every councillor is at a minimum?
Yeah, that seems to be the way the judge, Justice Gray, read the section, and also relied on subsection 3 of that section, which talks about the role not including performance of any of the responsibilities of the CEO.
Yes.
And the judge felt that additional paragraph was sort of a factor weighing against an exhaustive interpretation of Section 28(1), saying, well, that third paragraph must mean something. It must be saying, well, beyond those other roles above, be careful, councillors, in other things that you do in performing a role, that you don't step into the role of the CEO. So ultimately, the Supreme Court found that former councillor Lou, whilst he was engaging with the community on social media, was performing the role of a councillor, and therefore his conduct at the time could constitute misconduct. So the decision's really an authority for the fact that councillors communicating with members of the public about matters for decision by council, even though that might not fit precisely well within that Section 28(1) definition, that will amount to councillors performing their role. And so if they do that in a way that is contrary to the standards of conduct, show disrespect, discourtesy, etc. for an individual, that might amount to misconduct.
Right.
So I think it's my view. It's the right decision. I think councillors ought be subject to those standards of conduct when they are on social media. I think I do have. I'm not without sympathy for former councillor Lou here. I do think that I'm aware that his comments about Mr. Corr, beg your pardon, were in response to some quite distasteful comments on Facebook by Mr. Corr that were, talking about the crucifixion of Mr. Lou, was seen as by Mr. Lou as being anti-Semitic. There was also some quite disparaging references to women and sexualized references to women in a video that Mr. Corr had sort of posted a laughing comment to. And Mr. Lou had been then responded with language that was quite critical of Mr. Corr, and that's where the misconduct was found. So his post was, "I don't care that you have this vendetta against me and that you will probably haunt me until your comorbidly riddled body eventually packs up and is wheeled out of your such and such street mansion." And then in a comment referring to other councillors, it was, "The only reason you have not been thoroughly disowned by each and every councillor at Stonington is because you're a political asset to some of them. And when it comes to political assets, respect for women means nothing." So they were the comments made by Councillor Lou that were found to be misconduct. Now,
Tony, do we know what time of day those comments were made?
They were late at night.
Why am I not surprised?
On social media.
Yeah.
And to be fair to former Councillor Lou, he in the next morning, he sent an apology to his fellow councillor colleagues and subsequently deleted the comments. But nonetheless, there was a complaint by a councillor, and the arbiter, while the arbiter noted he'd apologised, said it amounted to misconduct. So that was the decision of the arbiter, but I do have some sympathy for Councillor Lou, given his fairly immediate apology and withdrawal of the comments. But nonetheless, the takeaway here, councillors, is that when you are on social media, be it at night, be in the middle of the day, commenting to the public about decisions you might be making as a councillor, this decision is certainly authority for the fact that your language that you use could amount to a misconduct offence.
Thanks for that summary, Tony. Very interesting. I want to thank Matt, one of our regular viewers and listeners, for drawing our attention to this, because we had missed it over the last couple of weeks. It came out very quietly, I think, unlike the one prior.
Yeah, in October, mid-October, Chris, I think that the judgment was published.
Yeah. So before we move on from that, you've just said it's instructive about the role of a councillor. Is this helpful also in the longer term to have some case law around the interpretation of councillors' role vis-a-vis the role of the CEO also?
Yeah, and I think that there's still a sense of an element of greyness there sometimes. I think it's very clear when we talk about, say, local laws, decisions, enforcement of local laws, decisions that amount to exercise of a delegated authority, decisions in relation to environmental health, building matters, etc. And we have those, and clearly decisions about the organisational structure, the hiring and firing of staff. But I think that it would be instructive, helpful, getting some guidance through decisions about, where does commentary about the operational arrangements at council cross the line and amount to a councillor's, attempting to, at least in part, perform the role of the CEO. That would be useful.
Okay, so that's Lou versus Glacier, that matter dismissed by the Supreme Court. Let's look at some other stories that have popped up in this past week or so. I see the government, on the heels of its housing statement, is now recruiting for 90 new planners to help deliver. And it keeps going back, Tony, talking about this backlog at councils. That's been so dispelled with the actual numbers, but the government's stuck on this line that they need the planners to help councils get through approvals that they're dragging the chain on. We said this when the first statement came out. Where are these planners going to come from? I just hope they're not going to lure them away from councils. It's already a struggle to get qualified planners into councils, isn't it?
Yeah, I think inevitably it might have some impact on that current planner shortage at councils. This is the Department of Transport and Planning that will be advertising for these 90 new planners to clear this apparent backlog of 1,400 permit applications for, medium density housing. I guess, Chris, it partly will turn on what are the conditions being offered and how referable are they to what's happening in the sector.
Yes, I wonder exactly what salary and conditions are being offered. If anyone can give us some insight into that, it would be really interesting tonight. I'd love to hear from any CEOs, perhaps, or directors of planning who watch or listen about whether they are concerned about this or already hearing of any sort of impacts flowing from it. 90 new planners sounds like a lot, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
We've got quite a number of mayoral election results starting to come through, Tony. It is that time of the year, and I think we might have talked about Warrnambool on our last episode because they were first cab off the rank, but we've had a few since. Last night, as we record this, Melton and Manningham. Kathy Madgelick is back as mayor at Melton. Carly Lang is, I think, a first-time mayor at Manningham. We've had East Gippsland, Moonee Valley, Pierce Tyson at Moonee Valley. Here's a bit of trivia for you. The first mayor to serve 2 consecutive terms within a council term at that city. You following me?
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's starting to get a bit like baseball, isn't it? With the with
another
the various
stat,
statistics.
another record.
Another stat. Who else? Moyne has conducted its mayoral election, and there's 1 or 2 more. Hume. So Joseph Awil is no longer the mayor at Hume. Councillor Naeem Kurt has been elected as the mayor at Hume this week. There's a list on the Local Government News Roundup website that we're updating regularly as those results come through. And please, if we miss any along the way, let us know. Tony, can I just have a little whinge? Councils, with your websites, can you please make it clear when your mayoral election is? Because I've been trolling these websites and some of them don't say anything. They just pop up out of the blue. So please help me there. All right.
Chris, I've stayed silent because I'm too scared to start to mention names in case I forget one or miss one out.
Yes.
That's the risk, folks. We don't mean to miss you out if we don't mention you. Let us know.
Exactly. Thank you. Well put. There's a new CEO being appointed at the City of Greater Bendigo to take over from Craig Neiman, who's stepping down after a long period of time there. And it's appointment from within, Tony. Andrew Cooney is getting...
joined City of Greater Bendigo back in 2018, has held various roles there since. I think Director of Corporate Performance, some acting CEO responsibilities at times, Director of Strategy and Growth, and more recently, I think, Director of the Commonwealth Games at Council. So he's worked in other councils across that Loddon and Mallee region. So congratulations to Andrew Cooney. I think he's a Bendigo local, very much, lives there, a family there. So that's a big shoes to stand in. Craig has been not only, a real major identity across the sector in Greater Bendigo, but I think he's nurtured a lot of current CEOs, I think, have come through in roles working under Craig, and would no doubt see him as having a big influence on their careers.
You're right, Tony. As I interview CEOs for the Local Leaders series, a number of them, when they talk about mentors and influencers, mention Craig Neiman. He's certainly made a contribution more than just at Greater Bendigo over the years. So in terms of CEO positions to be determined, we've got 4 now. on the list because Glenelg's been added, of course. Moira, Michael Tudball's there in an acting role. Greater Shepparton has advertised a few months ago, so they must be getting pretty close, I would have thought. And Bass Coast Shire, where Ali Wasty left to go to Geelong. And as the time ticks away, Tony, what exercises my mind, at what point do councils then have to say, we're getting too close to the next term of council to be making a decision like this with potentially a new group of councillors coming in?
Well, certainly they couldn't do it in that statutory caretaker period.
No, that's the legal legal element. But what about the I guess the ethical or the moral element for tying a new council to a decision like that?
And look, I have heard of councils, a month or two before the commencement of that caretaker period say, now, you know what, we're going to appoint an acting and we're going to leave this to the incoming council. So, it'd be interesting. I don't know that we've reached that point yet, Chris, but certainly at some point in 2024 we might.
Yes, and I'm not suggesting we've reached the point either. We're only just inside the 12 months, of course. But at some point, for some of those councils, it might become a factor. Let's just note a few other stories. Mount Alexander has announced that they're going to stay in the aged care space. So they're bucking the trend here and even plans to expand their aged care in-home service offering.
Yeah, I did see that. The Mayor, Councillor Rosie and Nia said, look, it's a decision that follows this extensive review of Council's aged care services program, like many councillors have done in light of these national reforms to the aged care sector. Mount Alexander Shire Council currently employs about 50 staff, delivering aged care services to about 800 or so residents. So, yeah, as you say, bucks the trend somewhat. A lot of councils are getting out, but it's local decisions to suit local communities.
Yeah, well done, Mount Alexander Shire. Tony, the city of Yarra has launched a very interesting campaign. We talked a few weeks ago about the e-scooter trial that's been expanded or extended, and Yarra is part of that with Melbourne, Port Phillip and Ballarat. And they've launched a campaign to deal with, let's say, inappropriate use of e-scooters called Bootin' Scootin' Off the Footpath. What do you reckon? Should we have a look at a bit of this YouTube video?
Yeah, let's check it out.
Okay, JLF, roll tape.
This footpath ain't big enough for the two of us. Do not block the footpath. Do not ride on the footpath. Do not ride without a helmet.
That is just so clever, isn't it?
Oh, it's awesome. I just love it. And what a great way to, encourage people not to ride on the footpath. Don't ride without a helmet. Don't leave your scooter lying around as a sort of obstruction on the path when you've stopped using it. Really clever stuff. Congrats to Yarra. Wins the prize from me for the most, exciting tagline, Bootin' Scootin' Off the Footpath, and great video.
I feel like I should have brought my cowboy hat today, and we should be playing some Brooks and Dunn Boot Scoot and Boogie in the background. So well done. I assume they're locals. I don't know, in that video as well, but it certainly made me smile. While we're sort of doing show and tell, you know a bit more about this than me, Tony. We've had a listener contribution come in from overseas.
Yeah, avid, and one of the avid listeners, probably well known to some other people in local government who listen to us, Scott Hodges, who's been involved in the sector for over probably 30 years in terms of this property management stuff. He's off on a sabbatical, but it's a bit of a study tour in North America and Europe, and he's sent us a bit of a short video about some of the information he's gathering.
Okay, let's have a look and a listen to that.
Hey Tony and Chris, Scott Hodges here, coming to you from Munich in Germany. Been really fortunate over the last couple of months to You're doing an international research tour on hybrid working in public and private organisations, not businesses that have just maintained hybrid working but have succeeded during that period, and been fortunate enough to see many of the top 50 ranked sites in the world by the Leesman Group out of Denmark. Look forward to catching up with you both when I get back and letting you and your listeners hear what fabulous things we've seen while I've been on this trip.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for thinking of us. And absolutely, when you're back, we will take you up on your insights. That sounds absolutely fascinating.
It does. It does. I think we all like to see what's the best practice somewhere else. And if we can grab some of those ideas here in Victoria, that'd be great.
Excellent. Thanks for the contribution. I also want to mention an avid watcher, I know it's a YouTube viewer in Canada, Chris Brown, who catches TGU every week, likes to keep his finger on the pulse of what's happening here. We threw him for a loop on the last episode because it looked a little bit different than normal. And I've got to do a mea culpa. The reason it looked a little different than normal is that I pressed the wrong button when we started recording and left it very... left our editor JLF, let's say, hamstrung in trying to make it look the way it usually does. So that's what happened there. But thank you for letting me know of your mild distress, Chris, and it's good to know that you're watching as well. This is great, this listener feedback and interaction, isn't it?
I love it. And yeah, we occasionally have tech issues, don't we, Chris? But we normally just start again.
Yes, that's very true. All right, let's whip through a couple of stories before we wrap up. We've mentioned what happened at Waverley last week. Waverley Council in Sydney held an extraordinary meeting for the purpose of vacating the office of Deputy Mayor. You might think that's not that controversial, but the reason they did this is the Deputy Mayor and one other councillor at a previous council meeting had voted against a motion condemning the Hamas attacks on Israel. I think that's the crux of it anyway. And the other councillors were quite clearly outraged by that.
Yeah, I think they might have sought to amend the motion that and add some other language of it that was, critical of the Israeli response, perhaps. But yeah, Councillor Ludovico Fabiano has made some. Yes, is the councillor who was the deputy mayor, at least, who's no longer in that position. And as we mentioned earlier, Waverley Council is one of those areas with a very large Jewish population. A majority of councillors, I think, was supportive for these notices of motion to, limit the deputy mayor's role and effectively bring an end to Councillor Fabiano's term. And I think it's in a desire to be seen to be in solidarity with that local Jewish community. But we understand that there are strong views out there on both sides, and different communities across the country are reflecting, the views of their local communities here.
Yes, and Councillor Fabiano's had a bit to say as well on his Facebook page. He maintains that he did condemn those attacks and is concerned that this international conflict is being used for political purposes over here. Not the first council in New South Wales this year to remove the deputy mayor from office, Tony. Bit of trivia for you.
And again, I mean, it's not a required position. I even think in Victoria it's not.
I think generally it gets resolved to have it, although the new Act 2020 does envisage the office of a deputy mayor, whereas the old Act didn't. But at Port Macquarie Hastings, this was political as well before this conflict came out. The office was vacated a few months back in quite controversial circumstances. So there's your trivia question. Which two councils this year in New South Wales have vacated the office of Deputy Mayor, and for different reasons? Let's whip across to Western Australia. I know this one has caught your eye, Tony, and you've been singing Hot Potato in your head ever since. This is Bunbury Council, which has been under fire for blaring the Wiggles Hot Potato song 24 hours a day at a local facility to discourage people from congregating, discourage homeless people from gathering, and to crack down on antisocial behaviour.
Correct in Bunbury, and it's not the first time they've done this sort of thing to what they say is, as you say, discourage antisocial behaviour, move people on. The Wiggles aren't happy. The
Mm.
Wiggles spokesperson saying, you know, our music was created to bring joy and happiness, and the group's quote deeply disappointed to hear that its music's being used in this other way. Council previously used, Chris, Peter Allen's "When My Baby Smiles at Me, I Go to Rio."
I go to Rio. Oh,
That was the previous song they had on loop, and again they copped a bit of flack at the time from that. But I don't know what music would get you moving on fast, Chris. Anything from
Probably-
Justin Bieber, probably me.
probably. I'm thinking possibly Minnie Riperton's "Loving You" on a 24/7 loop might sort of wear you down pretty quickly, or Kate Bush, "Wuthering Heights."
I
something
like that. I like that, Chris.
I do too,
Anything from
but
Kate Bush.
to play it back to back for 24 hours a day, you'd get sick of anything, wouldn't you?
Don't Worry, Be Happy. Bobby
Oh,
McFerrin. Oh, that would drive me to. Oh gosh, I'd be running out the room.
yeah, or Mumbo Number 5, or the Macarena, or something.
Okay,
But
we're
surely-
losing viewers. We're losing viewers, Chris.
Are we? Okay. I think Bunbury's doubled down on this practice, but surely, in light of the Wiggles saying we don't approve, you'd change it, wouldn't you?
Well, you'd
if you're
think
going to
so.
continue the practice, change it to something else.
Well, you know, or they might in fact just desist the practice. I think the council say that unbeknown to them, the volume was raised substantially of the song, and there was whether that's a tech hiccup or something, but that's the council have said it was a lot louder than they had intended. I gather that, you know, when they talk about antisocial behaviour, and I appreciate people were using this is it's a sound shell, like a memorial sort of sound shell where you know performances might occur. I gather that people that were gathering there, there'd been issues with, you know, drunkenness and using the facility, you know, as a bathroom and these sorts of things as well. So I understand the logic behind what councils have done, but it's been a lot of criticism in that local community.
Tony, shut up your face.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't work. That's Mama used to say when I was a boy. I remember that one. Countdown.
No, I
See,
meant
the Wiggles.
shut up.
I don't remember the Wiggles. I remember the band before the Wiggles, Chris, that the Wiggles came out of. Do you remember that band?
No.
The Cockroaches, the Field
Oh,
Brothers.
right. Okay.
1987. She's the one. I was in HSC, everyone. Yeah, sorry.
As I said, shut
Bit of
up your
trivia.
face. It's time to move on. I do remember the Cockroaches. Thank you for that. In New Zealand, the ombudsman there has called into question the practice of many councils holding private or closed, they call them workshop sessions. We'd call them briefing sessions. Another council, I think Nelson City Council, calls them task forces. The ombudsman has said these are contrary to the openness and transparency requirements for local government, potentially making decisions behind closed doors. And some councils have responded pretty quickly in moving to open up these sessions to the public.
Yeah, I think it was Dunedin. I think Dunedin Council might have done that. Yeah, it's an interesting one. If as you say, these workshops, as they're described in New Zealand, if they're, you know, analogous to our councillor briefings, my view is still that there's merit in councillor briefings to be not open to the public. I just think opening them up starts to kind of encourage a bit of grandstanding and maybe discourage councillors from asking questions that make them make them appear ignorant or uninformed.
Yeah.
So I certainly, when I was a councillor, I got great value out of these councillor briefings to help my understanding of an issue before I was able to then make a decision. And of course, the debate and the decision making was done in the public forum in the chamber. But, you know, New Zealand seemed to be going down a different path. And I must say I've heard calls in Victoria,
Yes,
in the sector for, you know, the opening up of councillor briefings to the public. So,
and at least
there's a contrary view out there.
At least one does it. I think it's Wodonga. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. I know it's been considered at Indigo and rejected, and potentially some others have looked at it. This quote from the Ombudsman I thought was interesting. He said, "The concern raised by councillors and officials that asking questions in public could make them look stupid was not a sufficient enough reason to exclude the public from those proceedings."
Yeah. Look, it's sort of, to me, it's starting to get like a Senate committee scenario where you see it televised and members of the Senate standing up and, seemingly berating, a public official for effect.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether it would get to that point. Yeah.
Seems there's a movement on, though, doesn't it? Okay, so Dunedin has opened its meetings, its public workshops immediately to the public, and Nelson City Council is reviewing its governance arrangements in light of this, and we may hear of more in due course. One very quick note before we wrap up, Tony. Last time we spoke about the Scotland First Minister announcing a freeze on council tax, and that the government would cover the shortfall for councils so that services could still be delivered. We discussed this with Julie, and Julie was interested that there'd been no response from COSLA or the sector to that. And we now know that's because they didn't know it was coming. They weren't consulted about it. They have said quite clearly that they were blindsided, and they're not happy to have not been consulted on this move, and they're not convinced it's the right way to go either. So that's the other side of the story. Yeah,
the trouble with these populist measures, once they're introduced, they're very hard to withdraw. And that's why I do think there needs to be a proper consultative process with all the affected stakeholders, including the local governments involved. And troubling that hasn't occurred here, but I doubt very much that Scottish government will be backtracking here. I imagine it's probably quite a popular measure in, amongst the constituents in Scotland.
So that's probably all we have for today. There's so much happening. There's a lot more we could have talked about, the wash-up from the Western Australian Council elections, but there's lots reported on the roundup about that. I'll just mention the city of Swan, Tony, which waited 6 days for results because they had to do 2 recounts due to counting discrepancies, but ultimately ended up with their first popularly elected mayor. Most of those results came in within a day or so. So that's all wrapped up over in WA.
Well, no cup tips from me, Chris. So
Nor me.
Nor
me. What I will say, here's a tip. Here's a tip for folks. If you want a well-considered investment in your professional local government development, you do worse than considering the Fast Track Day, which is coming up from the VLGA on the 17th of November. Need to give this a plug because it's on the subject of civility in local government. And we've got some,
topical.
It is very topical, and we've got some terrific panelists lined up to talk about this issue, talk about some of the trends that are happening, to give people strategies for dealing with, I guess, difficult people, and having public discourse in the right way, and an excellent workshop session that's been arranged as well. So this has been opened up to mayors, deputy mayors, councillors, CEOs and directors across VLGA member councils. So check the details out on the VLGA website. It's on in Melbourne on the 17th of November, and it's going to be, as it always is, a fabulous day.
Yeah, I think that'll be really well attended, Chris. I think a lot of people will be interested in that one.
Hope so, and I'm sure that's right. All right, Tony. So you've established you're not having a bet on Melbourne Cup Day, or you just don't have a tip?
I don't have a tip. I have no idea, Chris. But yeah, we've got a shorter week, a lovely sunny week in Victoria next week.
Yes, we're finally getting some continued warm weather by the looks of it. All right, thank you, Tony. Great to speak as always. Thank you to your team there at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers as always too, for supporting us both as a sponsor for the program, but for giving us you and your sage advice every week. It's a
pleasure, Chris. It's a pleasure. Wouldn't miss it for quids.
Have a good week. We'll talk to you next week. That's Tony Raunic from Hunt & Hunt Lawyers. That's VLGA Connect and TGU for another week. Thanks for your company. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on YouTube to make sure you know about our future episodes, or if you're listening on podcast, hit the subscribe button there too to receive your episodes automatically. And we'll be back with more very soon. Bye for now.